I'm Jennifer Gidley and I'm speaking to you from Australia. I was honoured to have my book, The Future, A Very Short Introduction, published by OUP in 2017. It's now a set reading for futures courses in universities around the world, and it's available in Arabic, Turkish, Italian and Greek, with Mandarin on the way. What I can offer you is a big picture long-term view of futures thinking. This is why I'm asked to consult with think tanks from Washington DC to UAE. As a psychologist, educator and futurist, I'm dedicated to human-centered futures. My concerns and challenges relate particularly to the exponential rate of technology development and the rise of what's called the post-real, as they contribute to dehumanization and human downgrading. The change in my lifetime has been exponential. TV was not around in Australia until I was 6. I look at the psychological, social and cultural impacts of exponential technology development in the context of the broader, grand global futures challenges that we face. In recent years, the hype, hubris and greed of Silicon Valley has been getting high-tech a bad name. Silicon Valley's echo chamber is seen as inward-looking, self-serving and self-righteous. But I do have some good news. I see an ethical turn arising, with some of the most experienced Silicon Valley tech experts waking up, walking away, and leading the way to more humane, more ethical tech. My task today is to inspire you to think about the future in a big picture sense. Your task is to work out how all of this impacts on research, marketing, and publishing. I hope my talk will inspire and challenge you. So let's begin. Big Picture Futures, a human-centered approach to global challenges. I'll cover 3 broad areas. I'm going to do a romp through the history, the past futures up to now. Then I'm going to look at the grand global futures challenges that we face. Then I'll focus on human-centered alternative futures. So why do we need a retrospective? Well, we need to look back to understand futures and change. OUP has a 500-year past. Do you want a 500-year future? In ancient Greece, Persia and the Middle East, the future was seen to be in the hands of the gods. The Sibyls were believed to have direct access to divine revelations. Their oracles were treated with great respect within their culture. In Greek and Roman utopias, the future shifted to being in the hands of humans. Plato's Republic saw a shift from the golden age of gods to human-centered futures utopias. We also saw a shift from cyclical to linear time during that period. Here's a beautiful image of the 600-year-old astrological clock in Prague, where the cyclical sense of time was governed by large astrological cycles and also seasonal rhythms and solar and lunar cycles. The Greek philosophers divided existence into linear time, past, present, and the new concept of future. Roman philosopher Cicero consolidated this idea of the linear time with his concept of facta, what has been already accomplished and can be taken as solid, and futura, what shall come into being and is as yet undone. Augustine's City of God was the first linear time visionary utopia. It was a utopian future society based on love, drawing from the Christian teachings of the time. Then we had Roger Bacon. In 1260, he was the first to envision flying machines. A couple of hundred years later, Leonardo da Vinci, who was definitely a Renaissance futurist, whose visions provided prototypes for centuries. He created drawings of flying machines, and then the idea of flying machines came into science fiction. So Godwin's Man in the Moon had a lead character who constructed a flying machine powered by large swans, which carry him to the moon in just 12 days. Suddenly, in the 18th century, humans actually began to take to the air. Enlightenment futures saw in France in 1783, the first balloon took humans into the air. Suddenly, this future psyche shifted towards the idea of coming advances in technology. This was followed by what I'd call a futures by revolution. Between 1760 and 1800, it was a time of global upheaval. The British Industrial Revolution, the American Revolution of Independence, and then the French Revolution in 1789 to 1799. There was also going on a contest for what I call human futures versus mechanistic futures. German idealists such as Novalis and others were promoting the idea of human-centered futures, an evolution of human consciousness. In contrast, the British Industrial Revolution and French philosophers such as La Mettrie were more focused on mechanistic views of human beings. This was when the idea of human-centered versus technotopian futures began. Throughout the 18th century, we saw great progress in science and technology. It brought about an unbounded belief in technological progress. But this was followed at the turn of the 19th century by the first cracks in the dream of endless progress. The book by Malthus, On the Principle of Population, argued that population growth would lead to a dystopian future of overpopulation without the resources for human survival. Following on from that, industrialization and fear of the future prompted fear and anxiety about the future of humanity and even the survival of the human race. So we saw images of apocalypse and the last man. A kind of struggle between the Malthusians, who followed the Malthus doomsday idea, and cornucopians, who were the absolute optimists, particularly in relation to technology. But the neo-cornucopianism of the 21st century is not so much about an optimism of an abundance of fruit and vegetables, but an abundance of technological devices, which of course we can't eat. The science fiction turn shifted from utopias to dystopias. By the late 19th century, utopian science fiction was growing, but by the mid-20th century, there'd been a shift from utopian to dystopian. By the middle of the 20th century, there was a struggle for whether futures thinking would be used for war or peace. In the US, the Air Force funded Herman Cahn's RAND future work. In Europe, there were a number of futurist philosophers, journalists and activists who were trying to develop the idea that futures thinking should be democratized and should be used for peace work. So here's Robert Jung, who created the Mankind 2000 conference and book and was one of the founders of the World Future Studies Federation. So the question I would ask is, do we even have a future today? Well, the idea of a single future builds on Newtonian physics, which believed in a predictable, mechanistic future where everything was mechanical, including humans. However, by the early 20th century, quantum physics has emerged, and the idea of multiple possibilities, including multiple futures, was part of what emerged with the ideas of quantum physics. So, although quantum physics arose in the early 20th century, the idea of multiple futures didn't really take hold till the mid-20th century. By now we know that there are as many possible futures as there are people on the planet. I like to think of several approaches to futures thinking. Prediction, which is still around, requires mechanical certainty, which we don't really have. We don't have mechanical certainty anymore. So I like to look at other emerging approaches to the future, such as critical futures, which is questioning the status quo and business as usual. Cultural futures, which is about allowing for multiple voices, multiple cultures, youth and elders. Empowerment futures enables participation. Without participation, you don't really have empowerment. Integral futures is a transdisciplinary approach, the most comprehensive of all the approaches. So in summary, we see the future, the concept of the future, evolving over time, from the Sibyls, who are messengers of God's divine plan, to Plato's utopia involving human agency. From cyclical to linear time, we've seen swings between progress of science and technotopias to the pessimism of last man dystopias. We've gone from one predictable future to multiple possible futures. Now we're in a pivotal time of risk, where we could go from our hard-earned human agency to the notion of tech addiction and futures controlled by AI. We have the risk of devolution. I'll now look at the grand global futures challenges. You can see, if you want to look at my book, The Future, on page 119, I talk about the grand global futures challenges. I can't go into them all, but I will focus on the major environmental challenge which I see as being climate crisis. The major geopolitical challenge I see is exponential technology. It's a bit counterintuitive, but I believe it's now become a global geopolitical challenge. The major socio-cultural challenge I believe we face today is dehumanization. Climate crisis. It's leading us to the brink of ecosystem collapse. 30 million people were displaced by climate change during 2020, and it's expected that 3.3 billion people are at risk from climate change, according to the IPCC 2022 report. Melting ice caps and sea level rise. The Arctic is warming 4 times faster than anywhere else on Earth. This is leading to sea level rise, which puts 500 million people at risk from sea level rise alone. What values have caused climate crisis? We've forgotten to value life, the environment, and our collective future. Can research and education help turn climate crisis around? So now the major geopolitical challenge, I believe, is exponential technology. It continues to addict and distract us. Addiction and distraction are designed into the social media platforms. This leads to growing mental health problems, particularly among young people. We have brain-computer interface, which has its place in medical science, but there are very big research dollars being spent in Silicon Valley, where the hype is around uploading our brains, digital twins. We have robotics, AI, and artificial superintelligence. Also big research dollars being spent here in Silicon Valley by OpenAI or Microsoft, by Alphabet, Google. And they're competing between their chatbots, ChatGPT, which is going viral, and Bard. It's really about male hubris and greed. These are not things we need. These are things that the big tech companies want us to need, because this is how they make their money. There are huge perils of AI. For instance, designing nerve agents. Researchers in a Swiss company tested their AI chatbot to see what happened when they reversed the instructions to make it human unfriendly rather than human friendly. And the AI created very dangerous nerve agents. This is serious. This is a serious risk for humanity, because if the AI get into the wrong hands, well, exponential technology is about greed. And the 5 big tech companies accounted for 25% of the total S&P 500 market in 2021. However, it has fallen somewhat, and we'll talk about that later. So, when exponential technology meets big tech business, dehumanization is triggered. My mission in the work I do is to rehumanize our futures, especially through rehumanizing education. More on this below. So, exponential technology, what is valued here? The exponential development of technology and AI is about greed and dehumanization. It undervalues human qualities because it's mainly focused on profit. And it's a major driver of dehumanization and human downgrading. We must ask, can education and publishing help to keep it human? The major socio-cultural challenge of our times is dehumanization. It locks us into echo chambers and filter bubbles. Many young people spend more hours per day in social media than with their families. Dehumanization is an outcome of gaming, and much gaming is violent. Let's consider the US population in 2023 is around 335 million. 60% of that population, 189 million of these people, are gamers. We have the metaverse and the rise of the virtual or the post-real. Critics claim that the VR revolution that was promised for years is now starting to fade. It was big during COVID isolation, but now people are complaining it causes nausea and neck pain. The litany of the post-real goes from AR to VR to MR to XR. But does the metaverse exist? No, it isn't real. It's primarily gaming platforms. And the other serious concern is that gaming platforms are used by the alt-right, targeting young gamers, putting them through a gradual transition from moderate to extremist views. So gaming platforms are getting rich on algorithms that foster alt-right extremist content. Be aware. So what is the effect on young people? How do they keep their heads together? Well, essentially they don't. Research tells us that anxiety, depression, self-harm and eating disorders have been increasing in young people over recent years across the globe. So dehumanisation, what values are lacking here? I see a lack of discernment and human agency. There's a proliferation of information through the mass media and social media, but young people just don't know how to make sense of it. Can technology education help to develop discernment? So to summarise part 2, AI seems to be going viral, but it's still just science fiction. Machine intelligence is bewitching and bedazzling, but it's a long way from intelligent consciousness. The metaverse is a game, and it's losing traction with COVID waning. However, the alt-right are targeting young gamers. So what do we do to bring about more human-centered futures? We need to look at the alternative futures that are available to us. So again, in my book, The Future, a Very Short Introduction, I have a chart on the grand global futures alternatives. For every challenge, there's an opportunity. For every global challenge, there's an alternative. There's a way to turn things around, and that's what a large amount of my work is about. So the environmental opportunity is climate turnaround, but it's beyond the scope of this talk to really go very much into this. I will be focusing on the geopolitical opportunity of the ethical turn in tech and the socio-cultural opportunity of human-centered futures. So just a little on climate turnaround. OUP is doing something with this, with its Operating Sustainably platform. Its targets include carbon neutral by 2025. OUP is a founding signatory to the Publishing Declares Climate Action Pledge, and it supports all 17 UN SDGs. So OUP is doing a lot, which is great. There's a software company in Sydney who make the claim software can be part of the climate problem or it can be part of the climate solution. Their foundation mission is to build green software to scale with a trusted ecosystem of people, standards, tooling and best practices. You might like to look into that. But what I want to focus on is particularly the ethical turn in big tech. I find this fascinating. Over the years, I've started to see signals inside Silicon Valley of disruption, discontent and dissent. Here's Meredith Whittaker. She led the Google walkout in 2019 over all kinds of ethical issues. She claims AI is not intelligent. She says it's very clear to anyone who works with these machines, these AI systems, that they aren't intelligent. They just process huge amounts of data, and from that data they build a model of the world. And the model that they build depends on who programmed and coded them. Her colleague Kate Crawford, they co-founded the AI Now Institute in New York. Kate is an Australian researcher, academic and author of The Atlas of AI, Power, Politics and the Planetary Crisis of Artificial Intelligence. I recommend this book very strongly. Kate says AI is neither artificial nor intelligent. The prestigious Machine Intelligence Research Institute from the US says AI is science fiction. They claim even human equivalent general intelligence is still largely relegated to the science fiction shelf, in spite of all the hype and hubris coming out of Silicon Valley. Tristan Harris is the founder of the Center for Humane Technology in San Francisco. He's a former Google design ethicist. He coined the term human downgrading, and he's referred to as the closest thing that Silicon Valley has to a conscience. Human downgrading is the combined negative effects of digital technology on people and society. There's Amber Case, who's an American cyborg anthropologist. She claims very strongly that addiction and distraction have been designed into the technology, and her mission is to try to create calmer technologies by looking at the symbiotic interactions between humans and machines to create calmer interactions in this field. She's written a book, Calm Technology. Another aspect of the ethical turn is screen-free education. Ironically, the Silicon Valley tech experts from Google, Apple, Yahoo, eBay are choosing high-tech free schools. Here's the Steiner Waldorf School in San Francisco, where children are not introduced to high-tech in primary school. And interestingly, this is where Silicon Valley tech gurus send their children, because they know what they've designed into the technology, addiction and distraction, and they don't want their children to be subject to it. How ironic. So then there's also what I call the high-tech downturn. All the big tech companies have lost a lot of share value in 22 to 23. Meta lost almost 70%, Meta Facebook. Google's chatbot Bard gave the wrong answer about a telescope, and Google shares dropped by 144 billion in about an hour. Big tech is also leading the way in large layoffs in tech companies. Amazon has been the highest, with 18,000 staff laid off. Alphabet Google recently laid off 12,000 staff. And what's interesting, talk about dehumanization, these big tech companies don't tell their staff face to face, they just email them or SMS them that they've lost their jobs and they're locked out of the company. Other serious flaws in AI in 2023. Microsoft's ChatGPT, which everyone's raving about, there are hackers on Reddit who have kind of reprogrammed this chatbot to break its own rules or die. And interestingly enough, it is breaking its own rules. So this suggests that anyone can get hold of these chatbots and simply reprogram them, despite the rules that have been programmed into them. It's pretty horrifying. Well-known American linguist Noam Chomsky saying, ChatGPT is basically high-tech plagiarism, and it's a way of avoiding learning. So the question we have to ask ourselves, is this downturn we're seeing just a glitch? Or is it another one of the several AI winters that have been identified by Nick Bostrom, the professor of the Future of Humanity Institute at Oxford? Or are we seeing a serious disenchantment with high tech? This is what I suspect is happening. People are beginning to rehumanize. This would be my hope as a humanistic optimist. So how do we create human-centered futures? Well, OUP once again has created a responsible publishing report, and one of their targets for diversity and inclusion is 50% of women in leadership by 2024. That's not far away. And this report also includes their sustainable publishing platform. The Centre for Humane Technology, which was founded by Tristan Harris, who I mentioned earlier, they have a free online course, which some of you may be interested in having a look at. It's a course for professionals shaping tomorrow's technology, and it looks at a new responsible platform for tech. The Computer Science School at UTS, where I'm an adjunct professor, has a Human-Centered Technology Design Centre. This is a great contrast to what we call technological determinism, where society is basically run by technology. What they're looking at is trying to reverse that paradigm so that humanity is running the technology, which is of course how it should be. In my own work on human-centered futures of education, my book, Post-Formal Education, A Philosophy for Complex Futures, looks at 4 core values. Pedagogical life regenerates and counters climate crisis. Pedagogical love grows compassion and balances inequality. Pedagogical voice humanises exponential technology, and pedagogical wisdom helps to develop discernment in a post-truth world. I'll say more about my book in a minute. I'm seeing a turn towards slow and retro futures, an emerging trend which is countering technotopia, especially among young people. Young people are changing. They're not all high-tech addicted. So we're seeing a shift from Spotify to using turntables for music, moving from digital cameras or iPhones back to film cameras. People are doing digital detoxes or unplugged retreats. Young people are saying they're over fast fashion and they're looking to the rise of vintage clothing. We have retro travel and tourism, people travelling on trains and sailing boats instead of flying and cruise ships. Designers are revamping industrial warehouses as post-industrial chic. And I'm suggesting that there's an emerging post-industrial reinvention of schools and libraries. Let's reimagine books. Here's an inspirational bookseller in Angola, Africa. She knows that books give wings to the human imagination. In Latin America, where in many places there is not such a strong digital connection, there are creative approaches to mobile libraries so that young people have access to books. Here's my nostalgic post-cyber world reimagining of local libraries. Let's imagine if the internet became too unsafe to use. What would we do? We need to ensure that we keep publishing and that we can get books out there, particularly to young people in the world. So in summary, climate crisis can be turned around, but it's a subject for a whole other talk. The ethical turn in tech is upon us, and we need to integrate ethics into all our digital tech. And there are many practical ways we can embark on more human-centered approaches to everything we do, including publishing. So the overall summary is that we've gone from 3,000 years ago, an idea of the future being part of God's divine plan, to human agency and multiple futures. We've looked at climate crisis, exponential technology, and dehumanization. And then we've explored climate turnaround, the ethical turn in tech, and human-centered futures. I hope you've been inspired. I hope you'll have some wonderful ideas to bring through into your own workshops over the next few weeks. If you're interested in any further reading, my Oxford book, The Future, A Very Short Introduction, is available in multiple languages now. My book, Post-Formal Education, A Philosophy for Complex Futures, is the development of my ideas on rehumanizing education. And then there's my book, The Secret to Growing Brilliant Children, which also further develops my ideas on rehumanizing educational futures. Thank you very much, and thanks for listening.